Hello, thank you for clicking on this video. It's going to be an update about this server, and good news, it is running, and it is even running above my expectations. So it's really going to be fun to showcase all of it. So none of the machines up here are in use as of now. The one that is in use is the bottom one just here, and that is my new NAS, which I've built. And it is running way faster than the Synology that I've been using for the past 5 or 10 years. So I'm going to be able to show how it compares the specs, and I'm going to be able to geek over a few numbers. I've got a power measuring tool just here to be able to also show what's the power draw and whatnot. I'm going to be measuring the temperature inside to show like, hey, does it heat, what's going on inside. There is only one Ethernet and one power cable coming in and out of the machine, so no USB, no HDMI, no nothing else. So to control the NAS and all of the other servers later, I've got a PiKVM that is sitting right now on the switch. Not super visible under this angle, it's the green little light, but I'll be showcasing it later. And the PiKVM allows me to remotely turn on and off the computers, see what the screens are and whatnot. So I've got plans to be able to control all of the machines at once, but that's going to be in a later video. So yeah, I'm quite stoked. I'm going to be able to show you all of it, and without further ado, let me show everything. In the previous video, I had the hardware of the NAS ready to go. And here you see me plug in some cables to be able to turn the motherboard on and off, and a bootable USB key to be able to install TrueNAS Core. Now, although the computer didn't mind turning on, which was good news, it absolutely adamantly refused to see that bootable key. So I went online, went on forums, asked ChatGPT, and it seems like they were all suggesting that I'd reinstall the USB key using a Linux with specific arguments to make the bootable key more compatible with very old motherboards. I had another idea. Why not use a more recent computer, install TrueNAS Core on that computer, and then transplant the SSD from the newish computer, I mean it's still 8 years old, to the older motherboard. And that did work. I was able to install it on the SSD of the other computer. I was a little bit concerned that it would have to see all of the HDDs during the installation, but it turned out not to be an issue. I then spent a little bit of time exploring the shell, but it seemed to be quite limited. I want to be able to install some stuff in the future, so that was more curiosity for a next video. Transplanting the SSD from the newer to the older computer yielded the expected result. It worked. To my great dismay though, not all of the hard drives were listed. I was missing 2 of them on the web interface. I did recall seeing all of them listed in the BIOS, so I spent a little bit of time looking for options, seeing if something was enabled or disabled that shouldn't have been, but no, didn't find anything. So now I had the immense pleasure of disassembling all 8 HDDs to try and find the ones that were not being recognized by TrueNAS Core. Normally, you'd be able to see the names on the top of the HDDs, but not in this case because everything is mounted, so my only recourse was really to disassemble everything. So before I go any further, as you can see, I'm preparing a drill and an electric screwdriver. Let me talk about that a little bit. Let me present to you what is arguably the jankiest setup I've ever done with an electric screwdriver in order to ease my life a little bit. So what I used in the previous video to mount all of the HDDs was an iFixit screwdriver. So it's handy because you got like the right screw heads, you get this like very flexible thing. But I'm still doing everything by hand, so it's really inconvenient. Luck would have it, I have this piece, I still to this day have got no clue how it ended up, but I do have a tendency of holding tools, so it must be a leftover or like a really old thing. Put the adapter, it's hollow, it accommodates the bit, and then I'm able to screw my HDDs at seriously odd angles. I do have to be really careful though, because HDDs were never ever intended to be screwed with an electric screwdriver. It doesn't matter if I put it on power 1. And since this was never designed to accommodate this in the first place, things fall out. The important part is that it worked, and it actually did save me a whole lot of my sanity. This said, yeah, I just wanted to show just how janky the setup is. Even though the janky setup saved me a lot of time for all of the screws in between the two HDD racks, it still took a lot of time. Plus, additionally, I was convinced that some of the HDDs were bad, which, considering their age, is kinda normal. The drill that you just saw me use was to access the one screw on each top HDD that is hidden by the mounting bracket. So I made this little hole in order to be able to access it more easily with a screwdriver. Even with all of the techniques, even with the electric screwdriver, it just took so much time. And once I was done removing all of the hard drives, only then could I start looking at all of the names and try and find the faulty ones. Since everything was disassembled, I also decided to upgrade the fans at the same time. The fans were using the pin connectors on the motherboard, but this in turn meant they weren't running all the time. I wanted them to run all the time to cool the motherboard, so I had the idea, why not use the power supply directly to do so? The plan was to use the Molex connectors, which are also connected to the power supply unit. I then needed to make sure that the voltage I would get out of the Molex connectors would be good, so I can get either 12 or 5 volts. I then checked what were the fans expecting, and I did see that they were also expecting 12 volts. Now it was just a matter of cabling everything correctly in a way that would make it solid and durable. After looking at a few different options, I found out that I did in fact have crimps that fitted exactly the size of a female Molex connector, ensuring a very, very solid fit. Here I spent quite a lot of time on what was essentially a broken fan. I thought I had crimped a cable incorrectly or inverted the connection, so I tried different combinations. I tried using a power supply. Turns out the fan was just completely broken and probably has been for a long time, so I ended up having to replace it. And it worked. Now when I turn the computer on, it's the power supply that ensures that the fans are running at full capacity all the time, ensuring that the hard drives do remain nice and cool as much as the ambient air allows. At this point I reassembled everything while removing the hard drives that TrueNAS couldn't see. I also zip-tied all of the cables to prevent them from being all over the place. At long last, I could reboot the computer, and this time I went straight to the BIOS to make sure that all of the hard drives were indeed seen by the computer itself before proceeding with checking it on TrueNAS itself. Sadly for me, TrueNAS Core couldn't see all of the HDDs, and it's increasingly apparent that that HDD rack is a serious pain to get stuff in and out. So my hypothesis is that either I have bad SATA cables or bad SATA ports. Either way, I did have a plan B at hand, although it wasn't initially planned for this. So plan B was to use RAID cards, which were initially planned for the next NAS build in a next video. I'll be transparent, I don't know much about RAID cards in general. This one specifically was recommended to me by a good friend of mine on the basis that it was cheap, reliable, available, but it also because it allowed me to configure the RAID through software rather than hardware. The latter could apparently have caused me quite a headache should ever the card fail. And to my greatest pleasure, this time, upon booting TrueNAS Core, all HDDs were visible, which in turn confirms that yes, I must have had a bad cable or a bad connection. I did add quite a few zip ties as I was concerned that the cables looked quite thin and fragile and I didn't want to risk damaging any of them. At this point of the project, the NAS works and is quite satisfying. Yet I'd like to go a little bit beyond on the project and have the means of controlling the computer remotely. To do so, I'm going to be using a PiKVM as it's a solution that will allow me, for a very cheap price, to turn on and off the computer, remotely pretend to have a keyboard and a mouse, and remotely see the screen. This opens up possibilities such as when I have a power outage and I need to remotely restart all of the computers. Although there are paid versions for the PiKVM, there's also completely open source DIY stuff which can use very cheap off-the-shelf stuff and allow you to have almost all of the functionalities for almost none of the price. And what you're seeing me assemble right now is precisely just that. It's the DIY. So I've got a breadboard, I've got components, I've got resistors and whatnot, and I'm assembling the interface that will sit in between the Raspberry Pi and the control of the motherboard. The way it works is truly magical in its simplicity. On your computer, you've got something called the front panel. This is where you have the power button and the lights indicating if your computer is on or off. These buttons and lights connect to a very specific place on your motherboard called the front panel headers. This is where mine are on my own motherboard. If I go back to the schematic, what's going on when, as a user, you press the power button is that you allow these two pins to make contact with one another. That's it. It's that simple. And what the Raspberry allows me to do in all of this is that through a web interface, it allows me to pretend like I've pressed that power button. That in itself is already really cool, but the PiKVM just takes it one step further. It also pretends to be a computer screen. So not only can I control the computer remotely, I can even see what is going on through this little device. But wait, there's even more. Additionally, on top of all of that, it also pretends to be a keyboard and a mouse. Now, importantly, a lot of these remote control features can be done through a tool such as TeamViewer. The key difference here is that not only the PiKVM will allow you to restart your computer, it's also going to allow you to access the boot menu of said computer. This opens up possibilities such as reinstalling or reconfiguring your computer. If I come back to what I'm doing on the screen, what I'm doing is that I'm following the guide that's on the website of the PiKVM showing me how to connect and build the breadboard that's going to interface the PiKVM with my computer. I am, however, making double, triple, quadruple sure that I am in fact plugging everything correctly as to ensure that I'm not inadvertently going to damage my Raspberry. The only thing that the PiKVM displays on its own screen is its IP address. You can access it directly through any computer on its network. Both the antivirus and the web browser complain as there's no third party signing the SSL certificate. If I were to use a simple analogy to describe what's going on here with these warnings, normally websites use services such as Let's Encrypt to do the digital equivalent of having a passport saying, yes, this is who am I, you can trust me on that. PiKVM is doing the equivalent of writing its own passport, handing it to you and say, trust me bro, that's me. That should only be an issue if I were to set up my PiKVM through the router to be connected to through the internet. Since I'm not going to do it, it shouldn't be an issue. If I go back to the matter of using the PiKVM, what you've just seen me do right now, and which prompted me a warning, is that I pressed the power button of my computer remotely through the Raspberry Pi. This, in turn, requests the computer to turn on. It takes a bit of time, but that's because the computer is quite old. And what's really fantastic is that the screen that is being displayed here technically doesn't exist. The video information is going from the computer to the CSI camera adapter, to the PiKVM Raspberry, over the local internet, onto my computer. And now it was time to put the server back into the server rack, and it did take a bit of tinkering because I wanted to ensure that the Raspberry could be reused for other projects should I choose to do so. The parts that gave me a bit of trouble was the breadboard. I decided to hot glue it to the side of the server rack, but just enough glue that I'd be able to snap it off easily. Not perfect of a solution, but honestly good enough. I added an extra opening on the side of the server to accommodate the Ethernet cable, and the hole is just big enough that when the Ethernet cable is going to be put through it, there won't be enough space to let airflow go in and out. And since I was confident, I added a hot glue to the cables to prevent them from popping out each time I opened the door, and added a power measuring device to the power strip for the first benchmarks. So the two intake air fans plus the PiKVM plus the switch consume on average 25 watts at idle. During the boot process, the power consumption peaked at 230 watts, and then the average power consumption of the entire server at idle seems to have settled at around 155 watts. Sending a lot of files to the TrueNAS server only increased the power consumption up to 170 watts. What was a very pleasant surprise is that those 8 hard drives had a writing speed of 112 megabytes per second. In comparison, my Synology that is 8 years old and running 2 mirrored hard drives can only do a 50 megabytes per second speed. I also did the usual sound test, although I must say it's really quiet and it has been running continuously in my room for a solid week. I also added a few cheap thermometers to have a vague idea as to what is the temperature in and out, and it seems like there is very roughly a 2 to 3 degrees temperature increase for just that one server. So I may have to seriously ramp up the cooling of the entire rack when the other computers are going to be online. Hey, thanks a lot for watching this video till the end. In order to make sure that everything was running as well as it looked during the video, all of the edition of this video, or 150-ish gigabytes worth of files, time lapses, pictures and whatnot, were all put on the TrueNAS server in order to ensure that yes, it did stand a few stress tests and whatnot. And so far I've been really pleased with the outcome of what is admittedly 12 or 14 years old hardware. For the next episode, I'm going to see if I can't automate turning on and off all of the other computers while not spending a fortune, because PiKVM has got quite a lot of really good stuff in order to monitor, turn it on, turn it off, but it's pricey, like it's quite pricey. So I'd like to see if I can't do something on the chip, and that's probably, if all goes to plan, will be the subject for the next video. I've also got a few bloopers as a bonus, and once again, thanks a lot for watching this video. The flap here is up because there's airflow going through. You spoiled little cat. Computer. So in and out only come the power and the Ethernet cable. You see here. T'abuses! Tu abuses! So, last video, to assemble the HDDs, I used an iFixit kit, which is like really handy. And to reach really odd angles, I very simple used this flexible flexible extension with bits. It worked. It was a major pain. Absolutely would not recommend. I would have loved to be able to use a drill, electric screwdriver.